So joining us now, MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin, senior reporter at The Bulwark Will Sommer, New York Times chief White House correspondent, and MSNBC political analyst Peter Baker, and former RNC communications director and Republican strategist Doug Heye. And Lisa, let's start with you. Not much to see there in the grand jury indictment or the grand jury files there, the transcripts. So what is the latest in the DOJ's attempt to get them released?
So the DOJ was asked by the judge to supplement their prior filing so that they could justify whether or not there are special circumstances that would allow for the release of grand jury transcripts. In that filing, as you just noted, DOJ revealing that in the Epstein case, there was a single grand jury witness, that person being an FBI agent. And the Maxwell case, that same FBI agent came back along with an NYPD officer who works in child exploitation. And those were the only grand jury witnesses. So this is shaping up to be what folks like Tom Winter, our national security correspondent, Christy Greenberg, an MSNBC legal analyst, and a former Southern District of New York prosecutor have long said it would be. Grand jury proceedings are necessarily streamlined. You don't put forward all the evidence you have. You put forward only what's necessary to indict the individuals at issue. And here, it seems like unsealing these grand jury transcripts will be far from the extensive, what I would call a show and tell, that the people who are demanding the Epstein files are asking for. There are no victims who have testified here. That doesn't mean that they don't have a stake here. And that's the other thing I find interesting about that filing, Ariel, is that not all of the victims of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell have been notified that they have an opportunity to have their say here. Instead, the Department of Justice representing to the court, they have notified only those victims whose names came up in the grand jury. That may be a very small universe of the more than 1,000 victims that DOJ has acknowledged to the public there were of these two child predators.
So not necessarily a nothing burger in those transcripts, but certainly not the trove that people might have been expecting. Peter,
Correct.
Sources in the White House seem to point to the Wall Street Journal reporting on the risque birthday letter as kind of a turning point for MAGA. Why is that?
Well, they hoped it would be. I mean, they wanted to be able to rally the base against a common enemy, the common enemy being the media. And in some ways that worked for a little while. There are certainly MAGA folks who took Trump's side in this and accused the Wall Street Journal of playing into enemy hands and so forth. Because the MAGA base that's interested in Epstein files aren't necessarily interested in embarrassing Trump. They're not necessarily convinced that Trump's name is in there. It's other people that they're looking for. It's other evidence of other billionaires, other elites, people like Bill Clinton or others who are known to be friends of Jeffrey Epstein. And it's not that they're trying to upstage Trump himself, but they're frustrated that Trump isn't cooperating in this desire of theirs to have all these files and all this information put out there.
So, Will, you have your finger on the pulse of what Peter was just saying. What is the latest from MAGA followers? How are they responding to this slow drip of information that we're getting, and not just the dumping of these files?
Joe Rogan clip you played there. I mean, there's really, I think, particularly with right-wing media figures whose careers are not as closely tied to Trump as Rogan has a lot more independence. I mean, there's still a lot of interest in these files. People are not moving on. I think the White House officials who were quoted in the Washington Post saying, this is all going to blow over this summer. I mean, they're either spinning or they're fooling themselves. I mean, I'm still seeing a ton of interest in right-wing media, a lot of opposition to things like cutting a deal with Ghislaine Maxwell, which appears to be another attempt the administration is doing to get out of this. And now with Senate Democrats invoking this long forgotten rule to get the documents, that there's going to be a court battle. In terms of this idea that the Wall Street Journal story was a real turning point for the White House, I mean, if we look at this logically, it is not good if you're the president for your lewd letter to Jeffrey Epstein to come out. So I think there are still a lot of obstacles here in terms of the White House trying to move on.
Doug, the White House has clearly tried to downplay the interest in the Epstein files. What is the Joe Rogan effect of all of this? Is it politically wise for the administration to be dismissing him and the rest of the people that want to see the files?
Look, when you work in political comms, you try and downplay a lot of stuff, especially when Peter Baker calls you. You want to downplay as much as you can. But the reality is this isn't just a Washington, D.C. story, and not just that Joe Rogan has 30 million listeners. It's people throughout the country who are right-wing, left-wing, moderate, center-left, center-right, who are talking about this. This is being talked about by people in every corner of the country. And that's not changing. Whether they believe this or not, that's not changing. But the reality of why this is stuck for so long within the MAGA base and other parts of our political infrastructure as well is because once you turn down conspiracy road, whether you turn right or you turn left down conspiracy road, you end up in a neighborhood that is a maze that is impossible to ever leave. And so this is going to continue, not just for a few days, but for weeks and months and possibly well on past Donald Trump's term, regardless of what we see released or not released.
So how, Doug, does the administration wind itself out of this pretzel?
The reality is I don't know that they can. The best thing you can do is avoid this from the beginning. Don't turn right or left down conspiracy road, because once you've done that, you've put yourself in a corner that you can't escape. This is why this hasn't gone anywhere. And let's say that Donald Trump releases all the documents, all of them, not just the grand jury. Well, clearly there are going to be some names that are redacted. There are going to be some black lines. We've all seen those on video screens. If you're full born into these conspiracies and you still believe that Elvis somehow faked the moon landing, you're going to see a black space and say, what are they hiding here? That never changes.
Okay, so Will, you know conspiracy theories, not that you believe in them, but you literally wrote a book on them. Will the most entrenched believers ever let this go?
I don't think people will ever be satisfied. I mean, I think there are so many legitimate questions here, but then also, I mean, the administration has done so much to fuel interest in this, to the point that the only way they've been able to really distract right-wing media has been by throwing out all this crazy stuff about Obama committing treason. And you can see even today, they just are coming up with new ideas every day about burn bags at the FBI that Trump can't even keep up with. He's not really understanding what these questions are about. And ultimately, you're going to run out of things to throw out to distract Trump's allies in the media.
Okay, Lisa, bring us back to the legal side of this and the congressional side. We mentioned in our introduction that Senator Chuck Schumer is trying to invoke this federal law demanding these files. How is this tactic different than what we've seen maybe from the House Oversight Committee in the last few weeks?
Well, the House Oversight Committee has issued subpoenas, right? And any witness who receives a subpoena that is valid still has the right to invoke their Fifth Amendment rights, particularly Ghislaine Maxwell, who hasn't been given congressional immunity and isn't expected to. So that could be a fruitless endeavor for the House Oversight Committee if she indeed does that. This, on the other hand, is a law, not just a rule, that allows 5 members of a congressional committee to go to an executive agency and demand certain files that are within a committee's jurisdiction. And that's what they have done here. And what I think is really interesting here, Ariel, is that it would seem that, given the way that the law is structured,
in a significant development in the ongoing Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell cases, the Department of Justice, DOJ, is facing mounting pressure to release grand jury transcripts, as discussed in a recent panel featuring legal and political experts. The DOJ has been directed by a judge to justify the release of these transcripts, which involve testimony from only 2 witnesses, an FBI agent in the Epstein case and the same agent alongside an NYPD officer specializing in child exploitation in the Maxwell case. Legal experts emphasized that grand jury proceedings are typically streamlined, presenting only the minimum evidence needed for an indictment, which suggests that the transcripts may not contain the extensive revelations some anticipate. Notably, no victims testified in these proceedings, and the DOJ has only notified those victims whose names appeared in the grand jury records, a small fraction of the over 1,000 victims acknowledged in connection with Epstein and Maxwell. The push for transparency in the Epstein case has sparked significant public and political interest, particularly among supporters of former President Donald Trump's MAGA base, who are eager to uncover details about elite figures potentially linked to Epstein, such as Bill Clinton, rather than focusing on Trump himself. A Wall Street Journal report about a controversial birthday letter has been cited as a pivotal moment, rallying MAGA supporters against perceived media bias. However, frustration persists among these supporters due to the slow release of information and Trump's perceived lack of cooperation in declassifying the files. Political analysts noted that the administration's attempts to downplay the issue, including dismissing the influence of figures like Joe Rogan, whose platform amplifies public interest, may be politically unwise. Rogan's significant audience and the broader public's fascination with the case, spanning political ideologies, indicate that the Epstein narrative remains a potent and enduring issue. The White House's strategy to deflect attention from the Epstein files has included controversial tactics, such as floating unrelated claims about figures like Barack Obama, but these efforts have struggled to quell public curiosity. Political strategists argue that the administration's attempts to dismiss the issue risk alienating a broad swath of Americans, as the Epstein case resonates beyond Washington, D.C., and engages diverse political factions. The persistent interest is fueled by a broader distrust in institutions, with conspiracy theories complicating efforts to move past the controversy. Analysts warned that even if all documents were released, redactions would likely perpetuate speculation among those predisposed to conspiracy narratives. On the legal and congressional front, Senate Democrats, led by Senator Chuck Schumer, are invoking a federal law to demand access to the Epstein files, a tactic distinct from the House Oversight Committee's subpoenas, which may be thwarted by witnesses invoking their Fifth Amendment rights. This law allows a small group of congressional members to request documents within their jurisdiction and potentially sue to enforce compliance, offering a stronger legal mechanism than previous efforts. Meanwhile, reports suggest coordination between the White House and House Oversight Committee Chair James Comer, who has not yet issued a subpoena for the files, reflecting a strategic alignment to limit the investigation's scope. Former President Trump's recent comments on Air Force One, addressing his relationship with Epstein and alleging that Epstein took employees from him, underscore his tendency to confront controversies directly rather than ignore them. This approach contrasts with traditional political strategies of deflection and has kept the issue alive in public discourse. As the Epstein case continues to captivate the public and challenge the administration, experts agree that its complexities and the deep-seated mistrust it inspires will likely sustain its prominence for months, if not years, regardless of what information is ultimately disclosed.